The cupcake sat untouched on the counter, its frosting already beginning to wilt under the bakery's warm display lights. Ava Bennett had bought it herself an hour earlier from the grocery store 2 blocks away, because some quiet, stubborn part of her still refused to let a birthday pass completely unmarked. She hadn't lit a candle. She hadn't even taken a bite. She was 26 years old, closing up Delgado's bakery alone on a Tuesday evening, and not a single person had remembered. Not her coworker Priya, who'd left at 4 without a word. Not her landlord, who'd texted only about next month's rent. Not the handful of distant cousins scattered across the country who exchanged holiday cards but little else since her parents' deaths 4 years ago. She wiped down the display case one more time, glancing at the calendar taped behind the register. Today's date circled twice in her own careful handwriting, a small, private acknowledgement that felt, in this empty bakery, considerably more pathetic than sentimental. The bell above the door chimed. Ava looked up, expecting a mistake, someone wandering in after hours by accident. Instead she found Marco Ferraro standing in the doorway, a supplier representative she'd dealt with only over invoices and shipment schedules, composed and dressed considerably better than the bakery's usual evening customers. "We're actually closed," she said, managing a tired smile. "I was just finishing up." "I saw the lights still on," Marco said, his eyes moving past her to the wilted cupcake sitting alone on the counter, then to the calendar behind the register with its date circled twice. Something shifted behind his composed expression. "Is that your birthday?" he asked. Ava's face warmed with embarrassment. "It's nothing. Just marking the date out of habit." Marco studied her a moment longer, something quiet and deliberate moving behind his careful eyes. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. "You don't have to." But he was already gone, the bell chiming again behind him, leaving Ava alone in the empty bakery with her wilted grocery store cupcake and a confusion she couldn't quite name. 20 minutes later, almost exactly, the bell chimed again. Marco stood in the doorway holding a proper cake. A real one from Antoinette's patisserie 3 blocks over, the kind Ava herself had never once been able to justify buying for something as small as her own birthday. "I don't understand," she said, staring at the box in his hands. "Everyone deserves at least one person showing up," Marco said simply, setting the cake on the counter beside her forgotten cupcake. "Even if it's someone who's only ever talked to you about flour shipments." Ava's throat tightened unexpectedly. She hadn't cried about being alone in longer than she wanted to admit, and she wasn't about to start now, in front of a near stranger holding a birthday cake in a closed bakery. "You didn't have to do this," she said, voice thicker than she intended. "I know," Marco said. "I wanted to anyway." She had no idea, staring at the careful, unexpected kindness of a supplier representative she barely knew, that Marco Ferraro controlled one of Philadelphia's most feared criminal organizations, or that his quiet, unplanned gesture that evening was about to become the first thread in unraveling a fraud considerably more dangerous than either of them could have anticipated. Ava Bennett was 26 years old, and the small, cluttered apartment she rented above a hardware store in Philadelphia's Fishtown neighborhood represented the entire fragile structure of a life she'd rebuilt alone since her parents died in a car accident 4 years earlier, within 8 months of each other, her mother from the grief her father's sudden death left behind. She worked full-time at Delgado's Bakery, a modest neighborhood establishment that had become, over 4 years, something closer to the only family she had left. Her financial pressure was constant and specific. Rent that consumed most of her paycheck, remaining medical debt from her mother's final illness, and the particular exhaustion of working double shifts whenever the bakery needed extra hands, because saying yes to more hours felt safer than sitting alone in her apartment with nothing to distract her from how quiet it had become. Her personal goal, held close and rarely discussed with anyone, was simply to someday save enough to take a few pastry arts courses at the community college downtown. A modest dream she'd been chipping away at for 2 years, one deferred semester at a time, whenever an unexpected expense inevitably ate into whatever she'd managed to set aside. Her emotional wound ran deep and specific. She'd spent every birthday since her parents' deaths marking the day quietly, alone, never quite admitting to anyone how much their absence made an ordinary calendar date feel like a small, private grief she carried without complaint. She'd promised herself, somewhere in that exhausting first year of loss, that she wouldn't burden anyone with how lonely she'd actually become, that she would simply keep showing up, keep working, keep being useful to everyone around her instead of asking anyone to notice her own needs. Her moral boundary was simple and unbending. She put others' needs before her own consistently without expecting acknowledgement or reciprocity, because focusing on someone else's problem was always easier than sitting with her own. Her practical skill, sharpened through 4 years of bakery work, was a careful, detailed attentiveness to numbers and inventory, tracking flour deliveries, sugar quantities, the exact rhythm of what came in against what the bakery actually used, a skill nobody had specifically trained her for but that she'd absorbed through sheer daily repetition. The recurring object at the center of her quiet loneliness was a single unused birthday candle she kept tucked in a kitchen drawer, bought 3 years earlier with vague intentions of celebrating properly, never lit, carried forward year after year as a small, private symbol of a celebration she never quite let herself have. The week before Marco walked into the closing bakery, Ava had stayed 90 minutes past the end of her shift, unpaid, helping an elderly regular customer navigate a confusing conversation with her insurance company about a hearing aid repair, patiently working through the phone menu options until the woman finally reached an actual representative. Nobody had asked Ava to do that. She'd done it because watching someone struggle alone with something she had the patience to help untangle felt like exactly the kind of quiet kindness she could offer even when she couldn't offer herself the same consideration. That same instinct, patient, generous, entirely without calculation, was exactly what had kept her hoping, quietly, foolishly, that this particular birthday might be different, even as the evening wore on with no calls, no texts, no acknowledgement from anyone. Standing in the bakery after Marco's unexpected return with an actual cake, Ava found herself unable to fully process the strange, warm confusion of a near stranger's simple, deliberate kindness. "I don't even know how to thank you properly," she admitted, cutting into the cake he'd set on the counter, offering him a slice he accepted without hesitation. "You don't need to thank me," Marco said. "I just didn't like the idea of you closing up alone on your birthday with a sad grocery store cupcake." Something in his careful, unhurried honesty landed with unexpected weight. Ava studied him properly for the first time since he'd walked back through the door, composed, watchful, carrying himself with an authority that felt slightly out of place against the bakery's warm, modest interior. "Why does this matter to you?" she asked. "You barely know me beyond supply invoices." Marco was quiet for a moment, something unreadable crossing his expression. "Because everyone deserves to be remembered on their birthday," he said finally. "I understand better than you might expect what it feels like when nobody does." Ava had no idea yet how completely that simple shared understanding was about to connect them both to something considerably more significant than a birthday cake, or how quickly her careful attention to the bakery's supply invoices was about to draw dangerous, unwanted attention from inside Marco's own family. Marco returned to Delgado's bakery more frequently over the following weeks, his supply visits stretching longer than the actual business required, his conversations with Ava carrying considerably more warmth than their earlier, strictly transactional exchanges about flour deliveries and invoice schedules. "You didn't have to keep checking in," Ava told him during one visit, setting his usual coffee down without being asked. The birthday cake was more than enough kindness for one supplier relationship. "I'm not checking in out of obligation," Marco said. "I find myself genuinely enjoying these conversations." "That's not really an answer to why," Ava said, echoing a directness she didn't usually risk with near strangers. Marco studied her, something considering behind his careful expression. "Most people I deal with in business either want something from me, or they're too intimidated to actually talk to me like an ordinary person," he said. "You do neither. You just talk to me like I'm someone who delivers flour and sugar, which professionally I suppose I am." "Is there more to it than that?" Ava asked, genuine curiosity cutting through her usual reserve. Marco was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to share. "My family has commercial supply interests across this city," he said carefully. "Also, other interests, older ones that come with the name Ferraro if you know Philadelphia well enough to recognize it." Ava's brow furrowed, something uneasy settling in her chest. "Ferraro. Mafia. That's the word people use," Marco said, not denying it. Every instinct told Ava to retreat into professional distance, but something about his directness, offered without excuse, without minimizing what it meant, kept her curiosity engaged despite her growing wariness. "That's not really what I expected from a supplier rep," she said finally. "I don't lead with it," Marco admitted. But you deserved honesty, especially after everything with your birthday. I didn't want to keep something like that from you while you decided whether you actually wanted me showing up here regularly. Ava considered his careful, direct honesty, something in it landing differently than she expected from a man whose family name apparently carried considerable weight and danger. I appreciate you telling me, she said. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I appreciate the honesty. Their conversation was interrupted by Ava's manager, emerging from the back office with a stack of invoices and visible frustration. Ava, can you look at this delivery discrepancy when you get a chance? He asked. These flour and sugar quantities on the invoice don't match what actually got delivered this week, and I can't figure out where the math's going wrong. Marco's attention sharpened with visible interest. What kind of discrepancy? Ava pulled the invoice over, her careful, detail-oriented eyes scanning the numbers with practiced efficiency. The invoice bills for 50-pound sacks of flour, 6 of them, but the actual delivery only included 4. Same pattern with the sugar, billed for more than what physically arrived. That's happened before? Marco asked, something careful and calculating behind his controlled voice. A few times over the past couple months, Ava said. I assumed it was just clerical errors on the supplier's end. I've been flagging it each time, but it keeps happening. Marco's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Which supplier handles your deliveries? Ferraro Wholesale, Ava said, then paused, realization dawning slowly. That's your family's company. Yes, Marco said, something considerably more guarded entering his voice now. I'd like to look into this personally if you don't mind sharing copies of these invoices. Ava hesitated, genuine unease building. I don't want to cause trouble for anyone. I mentioned it because my manager asked, not because I'm trying to accuse your company of anything. You're not accusing anyone, Marco said. You're reporting an honest discrepancy, exactly the way you should. If there's a genuine problem with how my company's invoicing works, I need to understand it, regardless of who's actually responsible. Ava studied him, weighing genuine concern against her instinctive wariness about becoming entangled in whatever complicated business dealings existed beneath Marco's careful, composed exterior. I'll get you copies, she said finally. But I want it clear that I'm not trying to make trouble. I just noticed something that didn't add up. Noticing something that doesn't add up isn't trouble, Marco said. It's exactly the kind of honest attention most businesses desperately need and rarely actually get. He left with copies of the invoices tucked carefully into his jacket, his earlier warmth now edged with something considerably more focused and concerned. Ava had no idea, watching him go, that her simple, honest observation about mismatched flour deliveries was about to unravel a fraud scheme that had been quietly bleeding money from Marco's own company for years, or that the person responsible for it was about to consider her a direct and dangerous threat. Marco's investigation into the invoice discrepancies moved forward quietly over the following 2 weeks, though Ava remained largely unaware of exactly how seriously he'd taken her offhand observation until the consequences began reaching her directly. You've been getting your hours cut, her manager told her one afternoon, visible discomfort in his voice. I don't fully understand why. Corporate's citing budget adjustments, but your performance reviews have always been excellent. Ava's stomach tightened with sudden unease. That doesn't make sense. I haven't done anything wrong. She called Marco that evening, uncertain but increasingly suspicious. My hours got cut. Right after I gave you those invoices. I don't think that's a coincidence. Marco's response was instant, controlled fury evident in his voice. I'll look into it. He did, and what he found confirmed exactly the connection Ava had suspected. His cousin, Sal Ferraro, who managed the wholesale supply company's daily operations, had personally flagged concerns about Ava's reliability to Delgado's ownership group. Vague, unsubstantiated complaints that existed nowhere in her actual employment record. Sal's trying to push you out, Marco told her, finding her outside the bakery after her shortened shift ended. Before your observations about the invoices go any further. Why would your own cousin care that much about a flour delivery discrepancy? Ava asked. I don't know yet, Marco admitted. But I intend to find out. The external consequence of Marco's growing involvement became visible within days. His trusted associate, Enzo, who managed the family's legitimate business relationships, confronted him directly, visible concern in his expression. People are asking why you're personally investigating a bakery's supply invoices, Enzo said. It's drawing attention, Marco. If Sal realizes how much weight you're putting behind this bakery clerk's observations, that puts her in a considerably more exposed position than she currently understands. I'm aware of that risk, Marco said. I'm not willing to leave her exposed because addressing it draws attention. The danger sharpened considerably faster than either anticipated. Ava returned to her apartment one evening to find her door lock tampered with, not successfully breached but clearly manipulated, scratches visible along the mechanism that hadn't been there that morning. She called Marco immediately, adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. Someone tried to get into my apartment. My lock's been messed with. Marco's alarm was immediate and absolute. Don't go inside. I'm coming now. He arrived within 20 minutes, his composed authority assessing the damaged lock with careful, methodical attention. This is a warning, he said grimly. Someone wants you to understand exactly how exposed you actually are. I don't understand any of this, Ava said, fear finally cracking through her careful composure. I don't understand why a simple invoice discrepancy is turning into someone trying to break into my home. Then let me explain properly, Marco said. All of it, honestly. He told her that evening about Sal, his cousin, his business partner for 15 years, a man who'd apparently been skimming money from supplier contracts for reasons Marco was still working to fully understand. Ava listened, fear and confusion building in equal measure. You think your own cousin is responsible for this, she said once he'd finished. I think it's increasingly likely, Marco admitted. And if he realizes you're the person who first noticed the discrepancy that's now threatening to expose him, that makes you a considerable problem in his eyes. Ava's instinctive independence flared, even through genuine fear about her apartment's violation. I don't want to be pulled into your family's business problems. I noticed a math error on an invoice. That's the entire extent of what I actually did. I know, Marco said. And I'm sorry that simple observation has apparently created this much danger for you. I want to move you somewhere I can actually protect you while I address this properly. Ava's fierce independence warred visibly with genuine fear about her apartment's violation. I don't want to disappear into hiding. I have work. A life I've built entirely myself since my parents died. I'm not asking you to disappear, Marco said. I want to add protection while you continue working. You keep your job, your schedule, your independence. I just need to know you're not walking home alone to an apartment someone's already tampered with once. Ava considered his careful, specific offer, weighing genuine fear against her fierce reluctance to let her hard-won independence dissolve into Marco's dangerous world. If I accept this, she said finally, it's on my terms. I keep working at the bakery. This isn't permission for you to manage my life beyond what's actually necessary for safety. Agreed completely, Marco said without hesitation. Whatever you need. That evening, reaching for her kitchen drawer to grab a spare phone charger, Ava's fingers brushed against the unused birthday candle she'd kept tucked away for 3 years running. She pulled it out, turning it over in her hands, something in the small, unlit wax stick suddenly feeling considerably more significant than it had a few weeks earlier. She tucked it carefully into her apron pocket instead of returning it to the drawer, unable to fully explain why, and packed a small bag under the watchful eye of Marco's driver 20 minutes later. Whatever came next, there was no simple path back to her ordinary, careful independence anymore. The protected apartment near Marco's estate, where Ava now stayed while he worked to address Sal's escalating threat, became over the following days less a temporary refuge and more a strange, complicated space neither of them fully acknowledged out loud. Scene 1 came the next morning, practical and immediate. Ava found Marco in the apartment's kitchen, attempting, with visible uncertainty, to recreate a simple pastry recipe from a cookbook propped open on the counter. You're overworking that dough, she said, taking over gently. It needs a lighter touch or it gets tough. I've never actually made anything myself, Marco admitted, something almost sheepish in his controlled expression. I own a supply company that provides ingredients to half the bakeries in this city, and I've never once made anything with them myself. That's oddly poetic, Ava said, working the dough with practiced efficiency. Supplying the ingredients for other people's celebrations, never quite having your own. Something shifted in Marco's expression, watching her observation land with unexpected weight. Scene 2 arrived 3 days later, An argument sharper than either expected. Marco announced, over a quiet dinner, that he wanted Ava to take an extended leave from the bakery entirely, given how thoroughly Sal had already escalated his intimidation. Absolutely not, Ava said immediately. We agreed that I keep working. You don't get to change the terms every time you get nervous. Ava, Sal already tampered with your apartment lock. Then increase security around my actual shifts, but you don't get to take away my job because you're worried, she said, voice rising with genuine frustration. That bakery is the closest thing to family I have left. I am not going to let fear take that away, not even temporarily. Marco sat back, absorbing the force of it, and for the first time actually paused instead of immediately defending his position. You're right, he said finally. Tell me what would actually work instead. Ava's anger softened at the honesty. Increase security around the bakery. Don't take away my job. Done, Marco said, meaning it. Scene 3 came on the 7th night, when Ava found him alone on the apartment's small balcony, a glass of wine he wasn't drinking held loosely in one hand. I have a daughter, Marco said before she'd even asked what was on his mind. Sophia. She's 14 now. Her mother and I separated bitterly when she was 6, and for almost 5 years afterward, the custody arrangement kept me from seeing her regularly. I miss birthdays, Ava. Years of them. I'd send gifts that got returned, cards that went unanswered, and eventually I stopped trying as hard as I should have, telling myself it was easier for everyone if I just stayed away. That's not an easy thing to carry, Ava said, sitting down beside him. Watching you close up that bakery alone on your birthday, nobody remembering, nobody showing up, it hit something I hadn't fully processed about my own daughter's birthdays that I missed, Marco said. I've spent years telling myself that staying distant was respecting the custody arrangement, respecting her mother's wishes. Watching your loneliness that night made me understand how much of that distance was actually just my own cowardice, dressed up as respect. I understand that better than you'd expect, Ava said quietly. I've spent 4 years telling myself that not burdening anyone with my own loneliness was some kind of strength, some kind of consideration for other people's busy lives. I think I understand now it was actually just fear of admitting how much I needed someone to actually show up. He looked at her, something raw and unguarded moving across his face. You keep finding exactly the thing I need to hear. I've had a lot of practice with quiet loneliness, Ava said simply. They sat in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the city lights spreading beyond the balcony, and something passed between them that wasn't yet spoken but was undeniably present. Two people who'd both learned, through different kinds of absence, exactly how much courage genuine presence actually required. It was Enzo who broke the moment, appearing at the balcony door, tablet in hand, expression tight. Marco, he said. We finally cross-referenced the invoice discrepancies against delivery logs going back over a year. There's something worth seeing. Ava's brow furrowed, following them inside. Enzo displayed a timeline alongside financial records, and something in Ava's memory sparked with sudden, startling clarity. Wait, she said slowly, studying a specific date. This delivery record. I remember this one specifically because it arrived unusually late, after the bakery had already closed for the night. I had to leave a note for the morning shift about it. Enzo checked the timestamp against another document. This is the same night your apartment lock was tampered with. Ava's stomach dropped. You're saying Sal was personally handling that specific delivery? Sal's alibi for that night claims he was at a family dinner across town, Marco said slowly, understanding dawning with visible cold clarity. But this delivery record puts him at the warehouse, personally signing off on a shipment, at almost exactly the same time your lock was compromised. That's not circumstantial anymore, Marco said, his voice going cold and absolute. That's a direct connection between Sal's alibi and the actual timeline of what happened to you. Whatever fragile calm they'd built over the past week had just shifted into something considerably more consequential. The following day, working through the accumulated evidence with Marco and Enzo, Ava found herself increasingly drawn into the practical work of piecing together the full scope of Sal's fraud. He's been doing this for over a year, she said, cross-referencing invoice dates with her own careful memory of actual deliveries. Skimming a little from each shipment, falsifying the totals to cover the difference. And when you started flagging the discrepancies, Marco said, he realized his scheme was at risk of actually being caught, rather than just quietly absorbed as clerical error. Why would he do this? Ava asked. You said he's your business partner. Family. Marco's jaw tightened. Sal's resented me for years, ever since my father passed the larger share of the business to me instead of splitting it evenly between us. He's always believed he deserved more control than I gave him. I think this started as a way of taking quietly what he felt he was owed. That's a significant betrayal to uncover, Ava said. It is, Marco said. And it's about to cost me considerably more than I originally anticipated, once we actually confront him with what we've found. The full scope of Sal Ferraro's fraud, once Marco's investigators traced it completely using Ava's remembered timeline, revealed a scheme spanning well over a year, systematic skimming from supplier contracts, falsified invoices covering the discrepancy, all hidden beneath Sal's role as trusted business partner and cousin. He's been stealing from this company for over a year, Marco said, studying the full evidence with grim understanding, using exactly the kind of trust our family relationship provided as cover. Sal, apparently sensing the investigation's direction once his associates reported unusual inquiries connected to the delivery timeline, moved fast. Ava received an anonymous, chilling text message that evening. Stop asking questions about deliveries that aren't your business, or the bakery won't be the only thing you lose. Ava's hands shook as she showed it to Marco. He's threatening me directly now. Then we move faster than he expects, Marco said, voice going cold and absolute. I want this exposed completely, evidence strong enough that Sal can't simply intimidate his way out of consequences. That evening, Marco gathered his senior associates, laying out the full situation. The falsified invoices, the delivery timeline connecting Sal directly to Ava's apartment intrusion, the escalating threats against her safety. Sal's been your business partner for 15 years, Enzo said carefully. Exposing him publicly doesn't just end his role in the company. It severs a family relationship that's been part of this business since your father built it. I know, Marco said. I'm doing it anyway. Why? Enzo pressed. You could quietly remove him, handle this privately, protect the family relationship's public appearance. Because Sal tampered with an innocent woman's home and threatened her directly, purely to protect fraud he'd been committing against his own family's business for over a year, Marco said. I'm not interested in protecting a family relationship that only survived because I never looked closely enough at what it was actually built on. Ava, listening from the doorway, stepped forward. I want to formally document what I remember, she said. The delivery timeline, the exact dates, everything connecting Sal to this. My testimony needs to be part of making sure this actually holds up. Ava, Sal already threatened you directly, Marco said. Standing up publicly against him carries real risk. Staying quiet carries risk too, Ava said. I'm not interested in hiding from this, especially not after everything he's already done to my apartment and my sense of safety. Marco studied her, torn between every protective instinct he had and the plain truth of what she'd said. If you're part of this, he said finally, you stay under full security before, during, and after. No exceptions. Agreed, Ava said, her voice steadier than she felt. The confrontation happened faster than anyone anticipated. 2 days later, Sal himself, apparently understanding that exposure was imminent, appeared at the bakery during Ava's shift. His earlier careful composure completely collapsed into something considerably more desperate. You have no idea what you've actually done, Sal said, cornering her near the back storage room while the front counter remained blessedly empty. 15 years of building this business alongside Marco, and you destroy it over some flour delivery discrepancy. I destroyed it because you were stealing from your own family's company, Ava said, backing carefully toward the storage room's alternate exit, calculating distance the same way she'd learned to during years of managing a busy bakery's chaotic rush hours. That's not on me. That's entirely on you. I deserved more than Marco ever gave me, Sal said, desperation cracking through his earlier cruelty. 15 years of running the daily operations while he got the bigger share, the bigger name, the bigger everything. I took what I felt I was actually owed. That doesn't give you the right to threaten an innocent person to protect your theft, Ava said. Whatever resentment you're carrying, you chose to make me pay for it. Something in Sal's expression flickered, genuine panic warring with cornered desperation. His hand moved toward a nearby shelf, fingers closing around a heavy metal mixing bowl. Ava's training kicked in instantly, Years of managing unpredictable, occasionally volatile kitchen situations surfacing in pure, focused survival instinct. She grabbed the storage room's alternate door, wrenching it open just as Sal lunged, the bowl clattering harmlessly against the closing door instead of connecting with her retreating body. She sprinted through the bakery's back hallway, adrenaline roaring through her, straight into two of Marco's security details, who'd been discreetly monitoring the bakery exactly as promised. "He's still back there," she said, breathless. "In the storage room." Marco arrived minutes later, alerted by his security's immediate call, his composed authority cracking into raw, visible fury the moment he found Ava shaken but unharmed. "Are you hurt? Ava, look at me." "I'm okay," she managed, adrenaline still roaring through her. "He's cornered. Security has him contained." Marco's expression went completely cold. "Then we finish this properly tonight." Sal was formally detained by Marco's security and local police, called in response to the physical altercation, his 15 years of trusted family partnership collapsing entirely in the span of a single desperate confrontation. "You didn't have to confront him personally," the responding officer told Ava, once her statement had been taken. "You could have waited for backup to arrive." "I wasn't looking for a confrontation," Ava said. "I was just trying to close up the bakery." He's the one who chose to escalate. That night, reviewing the sudden acceleration of events with Marco in his estate's quiet study, Ava found herself processing the full weight of what had almost happened. "He could have seriously hurt you," Marco said, his voice still tight with barely controlled fear that had only just begun to settle. "If security hadn't been positioned exactly where they were." "But they were," Ava said. "Because you insisted on protection even when I pushed back about needing my own independence. That mattered tonight." "I should have insisted on protection inside the bakery itself," Marco said. "Not just around the perimeter." "You couldn't have anticipated exactly this," Ava said gently. "What matters is what happens next." Marco studied her, something resolving fully behind his controlled exterior. "What happens next," he said, "is I make sure Sal faces complete and total accountability, regardless of what it costs this family's business or its history." The formal reckoning happened 3 days later, in a private meeting Marco arranged with his organization's senior associates. Sal's fraud laid out completely, alongside the evidence connecting him directly to the intimidation campaign against Ava. 15 years of partnership, Marco said, addressing the gathered room, his voice carrying clear and absolute authority. 15 years of trust, and Sal used every bit of it to steal from this family's business while threatening an innocent woman to protect that theft. Sal, present under guard, made one final, desperate appeal. "You're going to destroy everything our fathers built together, over some bakery clerk you've decided you're interested in?" "You already destroyed it," Marco said, his voice absolutely lethal. "The moment you decided threatening Ava was an acceptable response to protecting your own greed, you ended whatever loyalty existed between us." The decision that followed cost Marco considerably more than Sal's exposure alone. Formally severing Sal's role in the company, prosecuting him fully rather than handling the matter through private family justice, represented a significant, painful sacrifice. 15 years of business partnership, family history, and the careful balance of power his father had originally established between the two branches of the family. "This partnership has structured how this business operates for 15 years, Enzo warned in Marco's office, the full scope of the restructuring becoming clear. Removing Sal entirely rather than simply demoting him or handling this quietly within the family, costs this business considerable operational stability going forward." "I know," Marco said. "I'm doing it anyway." "Why go that far?" Enzo pressed. "You could quietly manage his removal, keep the underlying business structure intact." "Because Sal's theft and threats happened specifically because he believed his family status protected him from real consequences," Marco said. "I'm not interested in confirming that belief by handling this quietly, simply because doing so would be easier for the business. I'd rather rebuild this company's structure honestly than keep protecting exactly the kind of entitled corruption that let this happen in the first place." It was, Ava would understand later, the single most costly decision Marco made throughout the entire ordeal. Not the confrontation with Sal directly, but the deliberate, complete restructuring of a 15-year family business partnership. sacrificing considerable operational stability specifically because its foundation had been compromised by exactly the kind of entitled corruption he could no longer justify protecting. You didn't have to restructure the entire business, Ava told Marco, finding him in his office 3 days after the confrontation, exhausted in a way she hadn't seen from him before. You could have quietly removed Sal and kept everything else intact. I could have, Marco admitted. For years I told myself that maintaining family business relationships mattered more than examining whether they were actually built on anything honest. Watching Sal threaten you, watching him try to hurt you to protect his own theft. That taught me something I should have understood a long time ago. He met her eyes directly. Being remembered by even one person can restore what loneliness has quietly taken away. That's exactly what I was trying to give you that first night with the cake, without fully understanding what it would eventually cost either of us. I don't want to build anything in this business or in my own life on relationships that only function because nobody looks closely enough at what they're actually built on. Ava was quiet a long moment, weighing everything he'd admitted against the fierce independence she'd fought to protect throughout this entire ordeal. I need you to understand something too, she said finally. I'm not interested in staying close to you because I feel like I owe you anything for protecting me or exposing Sal or any of it. That first cake meant something because you showed up without expecting anything in return. I'm not going to let gratitude replace something that has to be chosen freely, not even for you. That's exactly what I want you to understand too, Marco said. Whatever you choose next, it has to be entirely yours. Sal's formal arrest and prosecution moved forward over the following weeks. The evidence Ava and Marco had assembled together leaving no room for his fraud to survive scrutiny. The company's restructuring, while costly, ultimately stabilized under new, more transparent management that Marco personally oversaw. You didn't have to testify so thoroughly, the investigating attorney told Ava afterward. A less detailed account would have sufficed. He threatened me and tried to hurt me to protect 15 years of theft from his own family, Ava said simply. I wasn't interested in leaving any room for doubt. Marco found her at the bakery several days later, the ordinary rhythm of Delgado's settling back into something recognizably normal despite everything that had unfolded around it. It's over, he said. Sal's prosecution is moving forward on solid ground. The business restructuring is fully underway. Whatever comes next, it's built on considerably more honest terms than before. How does that feel? Ava asked. Complicated, Marco admitted. Relief mostly. But also grief for 15 years of a relationship I thought I understood, and for everything Sal's resentment apparently cost him long before any of this happened. That's not something that resolves quickly, Ava said gently. I know, Marco said. I think for the first time in years, I'm actually ready to look honestly at what this family's business has become, instead of just protecting its comfortable, familiar structure. 2 months later, Ava stood behind Delgado's bakery's counter during a quiet afternoon lull, the business fully recovered from the disruption of Sal's exposure, her own role there settled comfortably back into its familiar rhythm. Marco had offered her, more than once, a management position within his restructured company. Generous, secure, considerably removed from the modest, familiar work she'd built her entire adult identity around. She turned it down every time, gently but firmly, exactly as she'd promised herself she would. You could take on something considerably bigger, he said one evening, finding her closing up after a long shift. You've more than earned that after everything you helped uncover. I know, Ava said. But this bakery is mine in every way that actually matters. Built by me over 4 years, through exactly the kind of quiet, careful work that got me through losing my parents. I'm not interested in trading that away just because a bigger opportunity exists now. Then what do you want instead? I want you to keep showing up, Ava said, something warm and certain in her voice. Not because it's my birthday, not because there's danger to manage. Just because you actually want to be here. That's already true, Marco said, something soft moving behind his careful expression. That evening, closing up together. A routine that had become, gradually, something neither of them commented on directly anymore. Marco reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside was a proper birthday candle, considerably nicer than the one Ava had carried and used in her drawer for 3 years. I know your actual birthday's still months away, Marco said, something almost sheepish in his usually composed voice. But I thought maybe we could light one tonight anyway. Just because. Ava pulled her own worn candle from her apron pocket, the one she'd carried since the night everything started, tucked there out of habit she'd never quite explained even to herself. I still have mine, she said, showing him the old, slightly bent wax stick. 3 years unused. I think I was waiting for exactly this kind of moment without fully realizing it. They lit both candles together on the bakery's counter, the small flames flickering warm against the evening's fading light, no cake beneath them, no formal occasion beyond the simple, deliberate choice to celebrate something worth celebrating. I know I complicated your independence the moment I walked back through that door with a cake, Marco said. I've thought about that a lot. Whether any of this actually helped you or whether it just handed you a different, more complicated version of the same problem. It did complicate things, Ava admitted honestly. But you also listened every single time I pushed back. That's the difference. You didn't just decide for me and expect gratitude. You let me set the terms even when it clearly would have been easier for you not to, even when restructuring your entire business cost you considerably to do this properly. Then let's keep building it that way, Marco said, together on whatever terms actually work for both of us. She closed the distance between them herself, deliberate and certain, and kissed him. The choice entirely hers, made with eyes open to exactly what it had cost and exactly what it had given her in return. Ava still keeps that same worn birthday candle in her apron pocket, alongside the new one Marco gave her, both of them lit together now every year on her actual birthday, no longer marking loneliness but genuine, chosen celebration. She still believes, more firmly now than ever, that being remembered by even one person, genuinely, consistently, without calculation, can restore exactly what quiet loneliness has taken away. If this story stayed with you, I want to know what you think. Was Marco's simple gesture that first night just an act of kindness, or did it start something neither of them was actually ready for at the time? Tell me your honest answer in the comments and why you believe it. If stories about being remembered when it matters most resonate with you, subscribe. The next one is coming soon.